Right. Welcome, everyone. I know I'll just give it a second. I know people are still kind of filing in, so just hope everyone's having a good day so far. Just give it a second. I know we're approving people. All right. Well, you know what? As people are coming in, I'm just gonna welcome everybody and say thank you, go through some housekeeping things. First of all, again, just for lack of saying it multiple times, thank you everyone for joining this session. We really appreciate it. As many of you probably know, I'm Scott Fiaschetti and I'm here with Brian Shopper. It's probably been a minute since he and I have been on one of these sessions together. So we're excited to do this again and to actually get back on a regular cadence of doing these webinars and these sessions. So thank you again to everybody for joining. We've been hard at work, as you all know, on getting the 2025 data set prepped and out the door. And this is what today's about. So I think many of you might have joined the session with Rob Peterson and Ellie Brobeck and Dan Levy on September 25th. So during that session, we talked at a high level about a lot of things about our process of getting to this recent release and want to go a little bit more in depth today, and that's what we're going to go through. But first, again, as I see more and more people coming in, so super excited about that. But as we do that, we'd like to go to the next slide and just go through some housekeeping things. So this is a member session, a members only session. So we'll have a link if you all want to share it with within your organizations after the fact. If you reach out, we can share the link because we will record this and probably somewhere down the line we'll share it publicly. But for now, we'd like to keep it as a member focused session. And all we ask is that you keep it within your organizations and share only with members. So we'd appreciate that. Not necessarily if there's going to be anything super secret they're going to talk about. It's just this is the benefit of being a member of GeoPath, and we want to keep it that way for a little bit. So just to talk about a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today, if we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the 2025 data set. But to get there, I want to go back a little bit and talk about how we got to where we are. Not necessarily to litigate the past, so to speak. I think Rob used that term in the last session, which it really stuck with me. But it sets a really good foundation to help understand how we developed our plans over the last handful of years and where we are today and why we're so excited about where we are today and why we're so excited about the future of where we're headed in 2025, 26 and beyond. So, and within that, we'll talk about some of those key updates that in the plan, and then at a high level, talk about the impact of some of these changes to metrics. There's another session that we're going to be doing on October 30th. In that session, we'll talk a little bit more deeply on the impact and what are those factors that really impact changes in impressions. So today we're going to talk about the data set, what changed and why these changes matter. And then we'll at a high level talk about the impact, but then go deeper in the next session. So hopefully each of these sessions are building on one another. And again, as always, ask any questions. We'll do our best to answer them. We'll do our best to answer them in context. So it's not like you ask a question about a specific thing and then 5 minutes later we're answering. So we'll do our best with that, but we may not be able to get to every question. And if we don't, we'll email you directly with an answer. So we'll make that commitment to everyone today. And I think that's it for the housekeeping what we're going to do. So we can jump into the talking about the data set and what changed and why it matters. So if you've seen us Brian or myself present, you've probably seen a version of this slide, if not this exact slide, but I'm going to talk about it maybe a little bit differently than we have in the past. So we do two things, and this is something we often talk about, right? We have two key products. First thing that we couldn't, if we didn't have this product, we wouldn't be able to do anything else, is our audited inventory database. And that's very key. So that's, Kevin Romero, I'm sure a lot of you know, he and his team are looking at all the inventory, auditing that inventory, making sure it's as precise as possible, down to the degree, facing the road, the size, etc. So that's a key thing. But that audited database has to live on a road network. So we have to have an understanding of all the roads and pathways across the US. And that's a key thing, and it's a key thing to know moving forward. So, it exists in the physical world, and it has to exist in the digital world on our digital road network. So that's a key thing. And then once we have that audited inventory database, we move to the next thing, right? And so based on the road network, we're able to understand circulation. So cars moving, volume of cars, volume of people moving on it, the speed that they're moving on it. So those two things are really tied to that road network. And then we also have to understand the trips that people are taking, as long as they're home locations. And then we're also updating demographics as well each year using census data and obviously Claritas data. But it's okay, Brian, leave it where it is. But understanding that base circulation and that speed data, that data comes from our partners at Bentley, and that's that foundational circulation. And when we're thinking about the home location data, that we're working with our partners at MotionWorks, and that brings the data to what we call recency. So we have the circulation data, and then we add this factors for recency. So then that all goes into the next set, which is the visibility adjustment index, and that's what brings us to an LTS metric, which we produce here. Also allows us to apply our reach and frequency modeling. And then we end up with our metrics, right? So that's our process at a high level, right? Start with audited database. We have this foundational data sets where we understand people and their movements. We're applying demographics, moves into our visibility adjustment, and we apply reach and frequency, and we have metrics. So what happened over the last handful of years? So let's look at 2019 through 2023. So going to say a term you probably haven't heard in years, but Operation More. So once we came out of Operation More in 2019 and launched, we had a particular road network that we were using. That road network stayed relatively stable in our network from 2019 through 2023. And so what that meant is any new roads that were built, any new things like an off-ramp or an on-ramp or things like that were not being accounted for, right? We weren't able to account for that. So essentially, you see shaded out the circulation and the speed. So that was limited by the road network that we were using. But we were able to update for recency, and that's why I brought that up in the last slide, using the MotionWorks data, so to keep bringing it towards more recent. But the foundational data set was, again, based on that road network, which again became dated over time. We were always updating the demographics, so using the census data, Claritas data, and again, our visibility adjustment index and model didn't change. We did have a few tweaks to our reach and frequency, but ultimately, that was the story over the last handful of years. And then even last year, something was even more different. So if you go to 2024, so the vast majority of our data, of our impressions in the system remain the same for most of the inventory. The only things that were updated, and again, this is in talking with our Geopath leadership, along with our advisory groups, made this decision. And this decision was made to help us be able to start to focus on the future to get us to where we are today. So the only things that were updated in that 2024 data set and throughout the year of 2024 were anything that was new or re-audited inventory for roadside or scheduled fleet, and all the place-based inventory was also updated. So, and again, I know some of you have reached out with questions. Why are the 2023 numbers for this unit the same as the 2024? This was the reason why, and again, it was in service of us getting to the next slide of where we are today. So with this 2025 release, everything has been updated. So we've been able to move to a more modern or more flexible road network that's going to allow us more future ability to in the future to continually update that road network. And again, Brian will talk a little bit more about that in a second. And with that, we're able to constantly, more frequently update the circulation, the speed data, as well as continuing with the home location and trip info, and then continuing with the demographics. And even this year, we've also updated some of the known issues in our reach frequency modeling. So this was an important step for us for the future. And so that's why we're very excited about this. And it's been a very, intensive process for us, and we do appreciate everybody's patience as we got to this point, but we are excited and really feel well set up for the future. So going to come with those changes, we're going to talk about some of the key changes and why they're important. And then, like I said, we'll dig deeper into it when Brian gets on. So first of all, I was talking about this. Oops. Go forward one.
Sorry, just one thing. Hey everyone, I just wanted to add one thing before we even move on from this slide. Oh, sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the waiting room as well. So the sort of key takeaway I think that's really important here is that between 2024 and 2025's data sets, there have been more singular updates more combined updates in the 2025 data set than I think any of the previous data sets since we started as this Operation More. I mean, they switched to the Operation More, which eventually became the Geopath Insights and the Insights Suite. That was, of course, a big push forward. But the update from 24 to 25 has seen more updates than any of our previous data sets. So there are a whole lot of reasons, and that's basically what we'll be focusing on today. There are a whole lot of reasons why things have been updated and different ways in which we've updated for recency and for better data sources. So I just want to have everyone keep in mind as we're going through this that this is a significant set of updates and improvements going into this data set.
Great.
So with that in mind, there are a few key factors that we want to focus on here. Scott, did you have a question or something come up?
No, I was just going to jump in and
yeah, go for it. Ready?
Yeah. No, so I was actually going to tee this up for Brian. Sorry for that. But if you don't mind going through this slide a little bit, building it a little bit, but I did want to talk about the importance of the change from the road network and the key things that it allowed us to do. So again, I mentioned a little bit already this ability to be more easily updated in the future. So previously, our road network was the here network, and we moved to our OpenStreetMaps network. This is an open source network, so again, it allows us to be more flexible with updating, and allows us to use the more current circulation data year over year. And then looking at the reach frequency model updates, there were known issues that had been reported over the years, and we were working towards helping to fix those. So again, now this new model has a better accounts for overlaps in audience, so what we would call geodispersion. So as you're building a plan, it really understands where they are located and the overlaps of audience within them, as well as, again, this known issue of, hey, when I add spots, my reach doesn't go up, or when I add audience, my reach doesn't go up. Again, while those were mathematically okay because they fit within the model, how do you explain that to a client? And we get that. So those are all been worked on and fixed. And then moving into the place-based metrics, we have more improved accuracy with the trends of circulation and the stability of audience, as well as with transit stations that falls under our place-based methodology. So we definitely updated the ridership there as well. Again, we know there's been some issues, not issues necessarily, but there's been some changes given the pandemic and kind of return to normalcy with some commuting patterns as well. Roadside movement data, we have many, many more reference sources. So if you go to the next one, Brian, sorry, a 2x increase in our vehicular counts. So that is at the around 2 million right now from I think a couple 100,000, and then even increased in our pedestrian sources 9 times. So again, I think we're at like 22,000 or more right now reference sources and currently, and then just overall updated movement data and reference data for, again, increased precision, increased granularity for us. So sorry, Brian, I didn't mean uh, to step on you there, but is there anything you wanted to add to this and then hand it off to you to talk through more of the OSM networks and some of the key bigger changes more in depth?
No, not necessarily. I'm going to go through these piece by piece. But yeah, I think that this is a good overview slide for everyone to just kind of settle on for a second here. And I'm kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but we do have a lot of support materials that speak to each of these. So as you have questions, as your clients have questions, we have things that we prepared that should hopefully help with that. But part of this, as I hope you all know, we're always here to help with questions and to help you better understand the data, help with conversations with clients if you're having difficult questions. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there is a ton of support on the GeoPath end whenever you need it. So let's get into the OSM road network. So you've heard us throughout the course of this and over the last several months, you've heard this talk about road networks and the OSM and the understanding of the importance of road networks. And there's a whole lot to this that is worth discussing, but I have some key things I wanted to just bring up here, just so we can get on the same page about like what is a road network, what is OSM. So as Scott mentioned previously, we were using the Here Maps road network, and since the 2019 data set, when we really started doing all of this GeoPath Insights data, we had been leveraging the Here 2016 R3 road network that had been updated for recency, but there were a lot of things that were still based in a less than current view of the world as far as the maps and the roads go. So what's really helpful about OSM is that it is actually an open source road network. And it's updated very, very frequently, honestly, near constantly, by like geospatial professionals all around the world. And so it's a very collaborative open source product. And there are a few different ways that that's really helpful for us. But just as a general level setting here, Scott mentioned this earlier. This understanding of road network is useful for us in a couple ways. And maybe if I go to this next slide here, I think this helps explain this a little bit better. So in here, right on this this side of the screen, this screenshot is from within our internal auditing tool. And these are all of these different segments. This is a section in Boston, right near Faneuil Hall. And these are all different road segments that exist within the OSM network that could be conceivably used as audience or pedestrian or vehicular pathways that might contribute circulation to a unit. And what's really important to understand about a road network in general is it's not just where the people are driving or where the pedestrians are walking, but it is also the roads upon which the units themselves are placed and arranged to mirror what happens in the real world. And so what's really important about OSM and what this has really helped do in this underlying change to the data set is this has given us a lot more contemporary roadway information. And we'll get into an example of that in a second, but that's also provided updated vehicular occupancy data, so the average number of people per car, updated roadway speed, which, as roadways are expanded or as construction happens, roadway speed changes, which affects the time that people spend in the vicinity of the units they're passing. Circulation data itself, vehicular and pedestrian, has also been updated. And so this 2025 data set here, this incorporates a full year of trip data. So September 23 to August 24. And with the point about roadway information and more contemporary roadway information, I think the best way to explain this is with an example here. So this is actually from a real instance, and I think some of the people who brought this to our attention may even be on the call here today. So this is from a real example that came up where in this example you can see there's the unit right here, there's a board right here, and it was just along this bridge. I believe this is heading into and out of Staten Island here from the New York side into Staten Island, New York from Manhattan. And so this bridge right here existed a short distance away from the board as it sat. And so at a certain point, there was an update, and the member who owns this board was like, hey, why are the impressions so different? Was something changed with the impressions here? And we went and we looked and we saw that the distance from the audience in our internal system had changed quite a bit. There was now a big increase in how far this roadway was said to have been from the board. And we were all kind of questioning, like, how could that be possible? It's not like the roadway just moved. Well, that is actually exactly what happened. So I'll try to go back and forth between these a little. You can see that not only did the roadway move, they actually did a significant bit of construction here and added a secondary lane, sort of a bifurcated lane here. So in actuality, what this did was move the distance of the board and the roadway passing it quite a distance over. And so without this contemporary understanding of the roadways in the real world, without an updated roadmap from something such as OSM, we weren't able to account for this as easily as we can now. We weren't able to have a real world reference data because that Here Maps Road Network was several years out of date in certain ways. So this is just kind of a quick illustrative example of how changing roadways and roadway configurations even can affect how far or how near or just the vicinity and the behavior of people passing by a piece of out-of-home media. Scott, do we have any questions or anything to pause on? And like we said, if you do have any questions, please reach out in the Q&A, and we can address those here or after the fact, whatever comes up. But this is just kind of one of the use cases of where contemporary roadway information is extremely helpful, especially because, as we all know, out of home is incredibly location and proximity based. The arrangement of people to the unit is a very important piece of the equation here. So let's keep moving on here. So the updated reach and frequency model. So as Scott mentioned, and I'll get into this. I did mention a little bit earlier that there are support materials that we've created. So there is a one-pager that we put together for the reach and frequency model updates itself. I'm going to go through each of the major pieces here. You can download this and we'll point you all towards where to download this later. But I wanted to take you all through the sort of key change and why it matters and how you can sort of think about that and why we made these changes. So one of the things that I want to focus on here, and let me just back this up so we can just kind of look at the updated roadside reach and frequency model. This is specifically reach and frequency at the package level and for roadside media. So I just wanted to set that before I keep going here. So one of the things that you'll find across all of these topics that I'm going to go through here is steps made to increase internal consistency, additional consistency checks with how reach and frequency is calculated at a package level. So one of the ones that's included here is this sense of improved geographic aggregation. And essentially what this means is that today in the new 2025 data set, roadside reach and frequency at the package level is now calculated at a county level, which is then summarized into larger geographies. And so again, this helps with internal consistency, and I have a visual example on the next slide that I think helps put this into context. But this is not necessarily, well, here, I think this is a little bit easier to explain. So on the left-hand side here, I have the counties that make up the Boston DMA. This might be CBSA, Boston CBSA. And then on the right-hand side, I have the Boston CBSA itself. So you can see, just based on the shape of these collective areas, that these grouped counties directly overlay with this CVSA itself. So what this update to the reach frequency model ensures is that the combined reach frequency metrics of all of these spots together, of all these counties together rather, would equal the reach of a plan run against the full CVSA. Effectively, it's additional internal consistency so that all of the component pieces add up to the reach and frequency of the whole, as you would expect. So moving on here, and this is actually, as Scott mentioned, this and the piece after this are directly the result of improvements based on inconsistencies and some known issues that had come about in the last couple of years with the existing, or at this point, previous reach and frequency. So there were instances in the previous iteration where you may be adding spots to your plan and reach and frequency or reach rather, was not growing as you would expect. Say you had 5 spots in your plan, you added a 6th, you added a 7th, and maybe there was not a logical addition to your reach when you got to that 7th spot as you would expect. In fact, there may have been some instances, and this is just an example case, this isn't based on an actual package that was sent to us, but this is to illustrate the behavior itself. But there may have been some instances shown on this orange line here, where additional spots in the plan may have actually resulted in a slight dip in reach here. So this change, the spot aggregation consistency itself, this change was made to help ensure that additional spots in the plan always contribute to additional reach or frequency. You shouldn't see, even though, as Scott mentioned, even though this was within the plus or minus the error, I'm blanking on the term, even though this was within the error sample rate of the modeled output, it doesn't logically make sense that an additional spot would result in dipping reach. So the updated reach frequency model in the 2025 data set now ensures that reach and frequency always logically build as you're increasing your package size and adding spots to your package. Now, the same concept, that same behavior, is something that may have been seen in other instances as well. So, for example, if you were comparing packages of, say, a 4-week campaign to a 6-week or an 8-week campaign, or comparing like the 18 plus audience to say 21 plus audience, there may have been examples in a similar way with the spot addition where reach and frequency did not logically grow as you expanded the plan or the package. And so here's just kind of another version of that, another example of that same thing. This one we're looking at the reach percent on the y-axis, and then we've got number of weeks. So this one was a just time frame based one. And again, there may have been instances where an additional length of time, an additional week, may have resulted in a dip in frequency from the previous reach, from the previously reported reach. Again, this is at both the audience and the time frame level. This has now been adjusted in the reach and frequency model to ensure that additional weeks in your campaign or the audience scaling is logically consistent with what you would expect. So you shouldn't see decreasing reach as you are expanding the parameters of your plan. Okay, and then the final piece here, and Scott mentioned this earlier, the final piece here is geographic dispersion. The way that I would think about geographic dispersion is essentially the overlaps of audience in your plan. So within a package, and I have a visual example that I think helps show this a little bit easier, but the reach and frequency model now better understands how spots in a package may contribute overlapping audience when you are looking at the whole. So say there are a few pieces of inventory along a single roadway, there's a good chance that they may be reaching the same unique audience, or the same audience multiple times, I mean. So the updated reach and frequency model here better accounts for instances where the same audience is being reached by multiple spots in the same plan. So putting that together in sort of a visual example here, you can see this teal plan, they're a little bit more, the spots in this plan are a little bit more closely grouped than the spots in this purple plan here. With this understanding, or with this example, and with the additions to the reach frequency model, the teal plan here would have a theoretically smaller reach than the purple plan, because these teal spots are much more geographically grouped. And so this whole concept of geographic dispersion is basically to better understand how unique and repeat audiences combine at the package level when looking at reach and frequency. Like I said, and I'm just going to hop back to the beginning of this here. There's a one-pager for, there's one pager here. Oops, sorry, move my screen 1 second. Okay, sorry. There's a one-pager on this that goes through basically everything I just went through here. So, and again, we'll point everyone towards those at the end, but I just wanted to talk through each of these pieces briefly. And perfect, okay. So this brings us up to place-based updates. So really the core takeaway that I think is important here is, again, increased consistency. That you'll see that as kind of a theme across all of these updates, is increased consistency. And specifically with place-based, that has to do with visitation patterns in similar places. So similar behaviors being applied to convenience stores or grocery stores, and using behaviors of certain places and helping to account for similar visitation patterns in those same place types. The other piece that you'll notice here, the transit station media, so that would be, it could be an interior of a bus station, it could be a railway station, like any train stop or something like that. So ridership information has been updated for 2020 with 2024 publicly available data. So not only do we have a better sense of consistency between similar place types, but the updated ridership information helps us get a better sense of the circulation of people in places in general. That's kind of the key takeaway, is this understanding, because place-based functions a little bit differently than roadside, but not necessarily the circulation of cars and pedestrians on roadways, but the circulation of people in those places. So these changes have particularly helped to address that, the understanding of people in the places. And then Scott also mentioned this as well, but there has been a significant update of the roadside movement data that we're leveraging from Bentley. So in this case, we've got nearly double the reference counts for the roadway circulation. And so the updated reference counts and the increased reference counts, that helps us with, of course, coverage across the US, but also because we have additional reference counts and sources, there's decreased bias in any single source. And the other thing that's important here, we're now utilizing, because we have the scale and the amount of reference counts that we can do this, we're now using scaled observed trip data rather than modeled trip data, which was being used previously. So that helps us better understand home locations, movement of people from their origins to their destinations of their trips. And so that has allowed for a scaling methodology of this movement data itself. So there have been a ton of different changes that we've just gone through, and I know this, there's probably there's a lot here, and that's why I want to keep mentioning that we have all of these support materials. So please feel free to ask us questions, and we'll point you towards all of that. But taking all of that into consideration, all of these changes, what does that all mean for the metrics? Because if there have been so many significant changes, how do I think about that in terms of the impressions on the unit that I have in my portfolio here? Scott, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And I know there've been a couple of questions, but I think we'll come back to them at some point in the session. So let's keep moving forward with this one, and then kind of go back, because they were kind of from early in the session. So we'll go back to them in a second. So yes, what does all this change mean? So, obviously, like as Brian said, there's been a lot of change, and so that does impact kind of unit level impressions. And you may have seen this if you're looking at your inventory within the 2025 data set as well. But what does that mean across all of our inventory? So this is just giving you a sense, this next slide, of the scale of change and how it's impacted across all of the inventory. So for example, 88%, that's almost 90% of all frames have experienced a change plus or minus 10% of pedestrian volume, pedestrian circulation. Similarly, if you look at the next one, 62% of frames have seen it experienced a speed change of 5 miles per hour or exceeding 5 miles per hour. So again, faster speeds means a negative impact. Not all speeds went up, some went down, but there has been that change. So that's going to impact impressions. Again, if speed is increasing, less time they can see the unit, less time they can engage with it. So it may cause impressions to go down. Like I said, we love congestion, we love traffic in this industry. So again, slower speeds kind of relate to higher impressions potentially. So next, this is the opposite of the pedestrian. So the vehicular circulation has seen plus or minus 20% change, about half of frames, a little more than half of frames. And then similarly, a little more than half of frames have also seen a change in what we call urbanicity, so area type, which relates to kind of the visual clutter. You know, imagine if an area type or an urbanicity type is rural versus urban, you can imagine that there's less clutter in one than the other. So that has an impact to impressions as well. And then next is about a quarter of all frames have seen a change in just the assignments. Again, we went from a good example is that example that Brian showed, you know, so that the number of segments may have changed, the distance that those segments are from the unit itself may have undergone a change. So there's at least a quarter of those have seen some level of change like that. And then finally, the occupancy. So again, this does have a bit of an impact, and you can see it's less than 1%. But again, that means that there's either a change of plus or minus number of people on average in a vehicle. And again, it's changed in various directions. So these aren't just up or down. There's some units have experienced increases, some have experienced decreases. And as you go to the next slide, this is just a high-level overview, and it's one we showed in our last session with Rob and Ali and Dan. But with the goal of it is just trying to help convey that there isn't any one thing. I know there's times where people might call us and be like, "Hey, look, I'm looking out my window right now, and there's traffic there." Well, it's not just the vehicular circulation that impacts change, right? It's a whole host of things. And any one unit, it's multi-factored. You can see here, and these are real units. We didn't provide the Geopath ID, but these are actual examples. So you look at this transit shelter in Miami. There's multiple things impacting it, right? From pedestrian circulation, the speed change, roadway assignments to some extent, and the occupancy. But again, pedestrian transit shelters, they're largely impacted by pedestrian circulation. So there's things that are impacting, and some may have more impact than others. And this is what we're going to try to go through and talk about a little bit more in depth in the session on October 30th. So we'll go through we'll tease out some of these examples here so you can see. But even still, if you go to the next slide, even media types that are the same have different reasons for their change. You can see this digital bulletin in California versus the one in Arizona. They each changed, they each had an impression change, but for different reasons, right? And different things changed within it that impacted it differently. So that's what we'll want to talk about in the next session. And this is just an example, a visual example to just show how it's not any one thing. It's often very multifaceted in what changed and the impact of all these changes. So I just want to see if there's any other questions that may come
yeah,
up.
there are a few. I did so. I'm just kind of quickly reading through a few of them here. So there's one question I saw in here. How does speed impact static inventory? The effect is essentially the same for static and digital. I mean, digital, of course, because the creative is rotating, that the speed may have a slightly bigger change in digital inventory, but effectively, if the speed of the roadway has increased, the time spent in the view shed for that unit is generally smaller. And the inverse is true as well. If the speed on the roadway has decreased, people are generally spending more time in the view shed, and there's theoretically a larger likelihood that they have seen that unit. A couple other questions. One was about so basically, a lot of the things here are specific to roadside inventory. Do we have documents and resources about place-based inventory? We can definitely follow up and get you some additional resources on all of that. Sorry, I'm just reading through some of these.
There's a question on digital inventory and whether full motion plays a role. And it does. We do have a bit of a factor to account for full motion within the digital inventory. In fact, it is one of the, when we're onboarding that inventory, it is something we ask for to know about. So it is taken into account. Sorry.
So there was also a question about here. I can back up a little. Here, yeah, a question about assignment changes and how that impacts or why those changes came about. So in some cases there are additional segments that are contributing audience. So say, you know, with this transition over to OSM, perhaps there were not, like, if there was maybe a service road alongside the highway that could also view the unit, or maybe there was an overpass or an exit ramp or something that was built in the time since the road network update happened. It could be that there are now just additional roadways that are, or roadway segments rather, that are being assigned as contributing audience to that frame. So that's likely how a lot of that is happening.
Well, additionally, with the OSM network being more granular, so before there might have been one segment accounting for maybe a highway, but now that gets potentially broken out. I'm not saying universally, but potentially broken out into an HOV lane and the other lane. So there's additional segments to assign to that unit just because of the more granular nature of the road network. So that is also a reason why some of that could be happening. Then that also accounts for some of that, you know, the distance from the audience, because some of those segments maybe now are further than they were before from the audience as well. And then how often are counts updated and revisited? Yes, typically we are still on an annual basis that where we're updating the data set, and we, for the foreseeable future, we will be on that cadence of annual updates. And again, I think being able to move again, I'm talking about today moving forward, right? I showed that slide earlier where some of the circulation was tied to that road network, which was very static. So now moving forward, we're able to have those foundational data sets that the counts, the Bentley counts, as it says in this question, updated more frequently. And again, there was also a question about the recency when I was talking about that. Again, that was because data sets, you know, as Brian said, right, this data set is from foundational data set is from September 2023 to August 2024. So we use that MotionWorks data to help bring that to kind of more contemporary data. So move it forward with the changes, the rates of trips in those from that network, and we apply that. We get the data and we apply it. So there was two questions in that and trying to address, and we can reach out to you, the person who asked that, we can reach out to you specifically and talk to you more about that as well. I'm just trying to give a high level answer right now. Anything else coming up? Any other questions that anybody had? We're just trying to scroll through in real time. Sorry about that.
And while we're talking about that, I also do want to just, I mentioned this a couple times about the additional support. I just want to bring that up while we're talking here. So this is probably the most comprehensive set of support materials we've ever done for a new data set. There is in the Insight Suite, if you are logging into our tool to the Insight Suite, right when you log in, there's sort of a home page thing. And in there, it'll say Access 2025 Support Materials. So we do have one page that hosts all of this together, but I just want to give a general overview here. I'd recommend everyone, if you're looking to learn some more about the 2025 data set, I'd recommend starting with the FAQ document. There are a lot of really helpful things in there. Some of them are the same types of questions we get or that we put in there sort of update to update. They're kind of general housekeeping about adopting the new data, but there are a lot of things that address the specific changes and the updates and things like that. More about OSM and what that means, more about the data sources that are specifically used in the data set. So there are a lot more sort of specific details in the FAQ document. And also the FAQ document basically links to all of the other things internally. So one of the main things, and this was a lot of the content of today's presentation, was pulled from this What Has Changed and Why It Matters document. Can't really call it a one pager because it went on to two. So it's a two pager of what has changed and why it matters. And there's one of those for the full 2025 data set, sort of a high level overview. And then there's one that goes specifically through the reach and frequency updates. The other thing that's important to note is that we have made a couple video summaries as well of these two What Changed and Why It Matters documents. So if you just want a quick video overview of either of these for either the 2025 dataset itself or the reach frequency, you can check that out. And then there's this other thing, this note to the industry I wanted to make mention of as well. And this actually lives as, I think, the third page in the FAQ doc. It's right after the table of contents. But basically this gives this gives a bit of an overview about these changes, sort of the high level changes that are found in the 2025 data set, what those changes mean, and just sort of setting some context for the fact that, yes, you will see fluctuations in the metrics from 24 to 25, but that is completely expected because of all of the change that has gone on here. So I really do recommend taking a look at this stuff. Ask us questions as well if you are having trouble finding anything, having trouble making sense of anything. We are always available to help with that kind of thing. And sort of to that end, we have been, like Scott mentioned, it's been a little while since we've done a webinar or even a series of webinars. We've been very heads down getting this 2025 data set done. And so beginning with the town hall webinar a couple weeks back and continuing with today's webinar, we've been trying to do a series of support webinars here to make sure that this transition to 2025 is as smooth and as information filled as we can make it. So coming up on October 30th, I have these up here just in case anybody wants to save the dates for these. And we have, I think, started to announce some of the, I don't think we've sent around invitations for both of these just yet, but I would recommend getting these on your calendar. These are upcoming webinars that we're going to be doing. The one coming up at the end of this month, the Guide to Understanding Impression Updates, as Scott was just covering sort of the different factors of change that may have affected metrics or impressions, we're going to be going through and looking at what might a single factor of change look like versus roadway speed and circulation changes and area type changes, and what does multi-factor, how do multi-factor changes affect impressions or single factor changes. So trying to get into a more spot by spot, board by board type of understanding about what these changes might actually mean for metrics. And then we're going to be doing an Insight Suite walkthrough with focus on 2025 data set. It has been a little while since we've done that. I know that there's always people looking to get up to speed on the Insight Suite. So we'll be doing that and focusing on 2025. So please save those dates. And here, let me jump back over, look at these questions. Is there?
Yep, there are a couple that I think we can answer right here. Does an extra spot in the same digital bulletin now guarantee increased reach? That's a good question. I mean, yes, maybe it would increase something, whether it's reach or frequency. Again, it's dependent on the unit, but the spirit of your question, the answer is yes. It does have it will have an impact now. But whether it's frequency or reach, it could be a little of both, but
right.
There is the answer is yes.
And specifically to that question, so the same an extra spot in the same digital bulletin. That's a really good example, actually. So going back to what I was talking about earlier about geographic dispersion, as Scott mentioned, that instance of adding another spot on the same digital frame would either increase reach or frequency. But as I was mentioning earlier, the 2025 data set has this revised reach frequency model. So if there's an overlap in audience who has already seen one spot on that frame, and then you're adding another, this would probably, as Scott mentioned, probably be resulting in additional frequency. But the understanding of repeat exposures and overlapping audience on the same units, that's now better understood. So again, as Scott said, to that question, you should see an increase in either reach or frequency. At the very least, not a decrease, but you will see an increase in either reach or frequency. Another question here, is the new data set available when pulling against all demographics? So yes, every audience that was available for 2023 and 2024 exists in the 2025 data set. So all those same audiences, and if there are any API users on here as well, all the same target segment codes, everything like that, same audiences are available as were in the previous two. And there is there's an online on our Confluence page, there's a list of all of the supported target audiences that has been updated to reference 2025, but that's unchanged. All those are the same. Okay, just taking a look through some of these other ones. Okay. We, like Scott said, we'll probably follow up with a couple people after the fact here. I just wanted to make sure we ended on this and had this email address up here. So this geekout@geopath.org, that's our general helpline. If you're not sure who at Geekout to reach out to, or sorry, who at Geopath to reach out to, this is a good place to reach out. It goes to a handful of us on the internal team, and then we can route it to the correct person. And there's a good chance that Scott or I or our friend Luke over here will be the one getting back to you. But yeah, feel free to reach out here if you ever have any questions and you don't know who to ask.
Great. And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody who joined today. There was a good number of people who signed up and who did join. So we always appreciate that. Like Brian said, I know a number of times, we're here, we want to help. Feel free to reach out. If we specifically can't answer the question for you, we will find out what the answer and get back to you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. We have a number of sessions coming up, so please join those as well. And again, any ideas on other sessions you'd like to see, always push them to us at Geek Out. There's actually also, you have the opportunity when you sign up, there's a submit question button as well. So feel free to do that as well. So like I said, we're always here for you. Thank you again.
And don't forget to look at these support materials if you have any questions. There's a lot of good stuff in here. And I'm not saying that because I made a lot of these, but there's a lot of good stuff in here.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
All right, fine.